Thank you. Thank you so much for the invite. And the Theosophical Society has a really great place in my heart because I'm originally from Chennai, and that's where I grew up. And I've visited the Adayar Theosophical Society many times growing up. And even now, when I go back in December, I try to visit at least once when during my visits. And it was amazing to me when I first landed in Seattle to discover the bookshop and the library and the space. And now to a point where I'm actually giving a talk here. It's a great privilege. So thank you so much. Um, so as Josh mentioned, I'm a neuroscientist and also a tarot reader, and I'm at the University of Puget Sound. So, at any point during this talk, if you have questions, please either put it in the chat window or I guess raise your hand and I will try and answer it. And there are some interactive bits, so I'm hoping that it's not like just me talking at you and you're going to be, participating as we're going along. Um, so the neuroscience of tarot, I was really curious about it because I started reading tarot in 2000 when my sister gave me my first set of tarot cards. But it was also the time when I started my PhD in neuroscience. So as I was doing the readings, I was wondering what's going on? Why is this working? And how am I processing these things? And that kind of led me into this research rabbit hole into trying to figure out what's going on in our heads when we're doing tarot readings and how it's helping us with our intuition. I now have a book out called The Neuroscience of Tarot. It's from Llewellyn Press, and you can it kind of walks through some of what I'm going to talk about today, and there's a whole bunch of journal exercises in it that might be useful. I also have a set of neuro tarot cards which are based on the major arcana. So essentially, I was looking at the major arcana cards and then thinking about the correspondences in neuroscience, and then I designed a deck of cards around it. And those are available on my website, brainmystic.com. So, for those of you who might not be familiar, let me just give you a little snippet as to what tarot cards are. Tarot cards are divination tools. Some people think they are Italian in origin. Some think they have Egyptian origin or even Indian gypsies with links to the Kabbalah. But there are pretty much in all the decks, there are about 78 cards, and 22 of them are major arcana, which is about major life events, mental states, emotions. So that's what they codify. And then there are 56 minor arcana, which is more like a playing deck, but that is offering more clarity, minor events, astrological seasons, and so on. And so usually a tarot deck comes with a whole deck of 78. But over time, different people have created their own decks based on how they respond to the imagery in the tarot cards. There are tattoo tarots, there are cat tarots, there are Indian goddess tarots, and there are different kinds of tarot cards. And this kind of imagery is pretty evocative and allows you to kind of form storylines and themes when you look at these cards. And that's been going on for decades, like people designing their own tarot decks. So that's kind of a primer into what a tarot deck is. So in a tarot reading, what is the connection between neuroscience and tarot? So in a tarot reading, you normally go in for a question. So you're maybe at a crossroads in your life, or you have some kind of confusion, or you need some kind of clarity. So you either do a reading for yourself, or you go walk into a tarot reading. And a lot of times we are talking about unsure emotional or mental states, or what kind of action should I take, or should I go this way or that? So, what kind of choices? So, a lot of it is about what your internal mental states are, or somebody else's mental states, and what are the outcomes and possibilities of a particular situation, and what kind of behavior should we do? So, a lot of these questions, as you can see, are very brain related. Like you need to use your brain or your body in order to execute some of these the answers to some of these questions or think through some of them. So when I saw this, I was like, of course there has to be a correspondence between the brain and tarot. So that's kind of was the impetus behind me doing further investigation into it, and that's what led into this particular thing. So today we're going to kind of talk about when we look at images, what provokes us into getting these intuitive flashes or leaps of faith that lead us down a particular path. So what is it about these kinds of imagery that allows us to go down that? There are other themes in the tarot reading that'll come up later, which is more about social transactions. So when I'm speaking and I'm giving you a reading, like how does your brain respond to it? And also the concept of foretelling, right? So some people go to tarot to say what's going to happen 6 months or a year from now, and that aspect as well. And while I discuss that in the book, I'm not going to talk about that in today's talk. If we have time, we can touch upon it, but that's not what today's talk is about. So this is a typical tarot card. So maybe I can pause and ask you all, what do you can either put in the chat window, or I don't know if people can unmute, but what do you see when you look at this particular card? A
Um,
doggy?
I see quite a few different aspects for like the physical world. You look like you have some type of dog, um, some type of person wearing clothing in a landscape showing the sun, maybe a mountain range.
Okay, that's great. On the chat window, one person talked about yellow, the color. That's great. Another person is talking about doggy, jumping off point for someone that doesn't know what he's headed towards, flower, clothes. So this is really great. So already people are different people amongst us are looking at different or focusing on different aspects of the card, which is great because interestingly, what's been found scientifically is that based on your cultural upbringing and how you are brought up, we tend to focus or zero in on specific aspects of anything that we observe. And that's why when no two tarot readings could be maybe exactly alike because it all depends upon how that person has been brought up and what's going on in their heads at that particular point of time. A fantastic example of this is if I show a picture of an aquarium to people from Japan as opposed to people from America, people in Japan might look at the aquarium and say, I see bubbles, I see pebbles, and I see the flow of the water. Whereas the people from America might say, I see the fish and I see the frogs and stuff inside. So the way what our eye is drawn to is very different based on your own cultural upbringing and what you're almost taught to observe. And we settle in on this kind of observational patterns around 6 to 7 years of age. That's kind of by the time you kind of solidify your, by the time you're taught in school or wherever you're learning stuff on how to observe things. And then from then on, you kind of reinforce that over and over again. And that's kind of what we are zeroing in on when we're seeing this particular image. So what happens when we see an image? So first, the image kind of falls in our eye, and then it goes to the back of your eye called the retina. And from there, you almost get a photograph of your image back in your back of your head. That's your visual center, which is why if I whack you in the back of the head, you'll probably see stars because that's kind of where your visual centers are. And so that's but even at that point in your visual centers, you don't recognize an object, in this case, say a flower, you don't recognize it as a flower. You just have an imprint of it in the back there. So images from there need to go up into your parietal lobe, which is kind of up here. And like if I'm wearing my headphones, they're kind of right there where my headphone sets is sitting on my head. So that's your parietal lobe. So your information from your visual centers are going to your parietal lobe and also your temporal lobe, which are kind of on the side. And that is where you're going to start recognizing an object. Is this object a flower? Is it a dog? Is it the color yellow? Is it moving? Is it some of you mentioned how this person looks like he's almost jumping off the cliff. So that motion information that you're getting in is coming from your parietal lobes. So these two parts of the brain on the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe is where it's going to be really important for you to recognize and identify objects and kind of decide kind of things about movement or not movement, and is it going to is there a flow to it, and so on. And the nice part is that even when you close your eyes and think of the object later, these parts of the brains are going to be activated even without the actual visual input coming in. And that's going to be the difference between just when you just look at it and you when you just look at the object and you get a photo imprint of it, and then do more than that. When you perceive something as opposed to see something, is that difference between whether you're actually using your other parts of the brain to recognize it. So let's now close our eyes. So maybe before that, I'll show you this card again. Let's all take a look at it maybe for 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So now close your eyes and try and picture that Fool card in your head again. Let's take maybe like 10 seconds to kind of try and picture that image in our heads. All right. So now let us try and figure out what did, when you close your eyes and thought about that particular image, did some things pop out in your head?
The flower
Some,
and what they're wearing
okay, flower
and the
and what they're
dog.
wearing and the dog. Okay.
I'm just seeing just red color.
Red color. Okay. The sun and the air. Interesting. The air. Um, it's interesting that an image, a 2D image, can evoke a sense of air when then there was a breeze, right? It's like where did that come from? It's almost like a scene, almost like a movie scene that's going on there, which is coming into our heads for some people. So this is all part of your mental imagery. So where even with your eyes closed, you're activating almost the same centers of your head, which we just talked about for for object recognition, and then it's kind of going reverse in the reverse fashion. So from the parietal lobe and the is going back into the visual centers. So even without that visual input, you're still managing to create like a mental picture in your head of what's going on. Um, Chris is talking about the outline of the overall picture, the theme and the meaning. Interesting. We'll get to that in a minute. Like what are these symbology standing for? And details of the dogs and flowers and colors in the background, but the hobo bag is carrying sticks because it's part of the major outline. So almost like what is foregrounded and what is backgrounded. And again, this might be depending upon how you're trained to observe things, is whether you are going to be more of a foreground person or a background person is something that we need to think about. And also another thing that will come out of this is whether you as a person is more face oriented or landscape oriented, like a scene oriented. Like Stephanie mentioned that there was the sun and the air and the breeze, so they might be more into the whole scenario as opposed to focusing on like a very minute detail of the face. So those are some things that come out in how different people process this kind of visual imagery is something that comes up. So when we are what's going on in our head when this is happening? So on the left, say, is an image where is your visual centers being activated when you're actually seeing the image, and on the right is kind of how it would look when you're closing your eyes and reimagining it. It's almost like a faded print of the of what you normally see, and depending on how vivid your visualization is, this could be super rich with colors and super rich details, or it can be almost really blank. So there are a group of people who do not have this ability to have that visual mental imagery. They don't have that vivid visualization aspect. And for them, this will be like much, much, much more faded. And it won't be as colorful or vivid as the picture that you have here. Whereas some of us have almost like a photographic memory where we can actually see it almost in full rendering, and that there's no good or bad in this. It's just we have different ways of approaching it. So for a person who does not have that kind of visualization aspect, what they tend to feel more is the emotion behind what they felt when they saw this picture. So they would kind of be able to describe the feeling of it as opposed to the actual little minute details of the visual aspects of things. So let's go to another one, but an image is not just an image. We're now going to start tying in meanings and associations to the image. So an image is never just an image. So let's look at this particular picture. It has not anything to do with tarot. Let's look at this picture and maybe you can tell me the first word that comes to your mind when you look at this picture. Food, okay.
Gathering.
Gathering, feast, family, lunch, okay. Dinner party, missing chair, all right. Table, right? So we are again getting a whole host of different things, and this might be influenced by what happened to you maybe in the last week or the day before or something. Maybe if I had the same picture right around Thanksgiving, some of you might have a different answer to this particular thing. Whereas if I have if I talk about this in like say after a different time, you might have a completely different answer to this particular question. So now we're going to tag a meaning to this particular image and see whether your perception of the image changes. So now we're adding the word comfort, and it's going to be a tagline to this particular picture. So let me know if your way in which you look at this picture changes now that we've had this word attached to it. So Kendall says no, it's still the same. Anyone else? Same here too. Comfort food, okay. Anticipation, happy family. Okay, I have a deeper understanding of what I'm looking for in lunch. That's great.
I have my response when it said comfort was that AI must have created it because it's not a very comfortable situation.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like a discomfort, right?
Yeah,
It's like the chairs don't look comfortable,
exactly.
and like who's want to really sit there for like a long time? That's a
Yeah.
really interesting take on it. And from there you can almost like go into thinking about what do card reversals mean for you, and those kind of, if you're doing a tarot reading and card reversals and the opposite connotations to a particular meaning is something that you can wander down. So we can change the way we look at an image by altering those taglines that are coming with it. So if I change the tagline to this, so now I just change the tagline to lonely, our perception of this image might change because we have a whole dinner table here and there's nobody at the table. And or maybe there's a whole meal but everybody is left, so maybe something happened and people have left the table. So our our perception of these images are changing because of the words we are tagging and associating with them. And this is something that, advertisers do all the time. If you have certain relationship with a particular object, say money or something, you can kind of maybe try and switch it by altering the tagline associated with your wallet or your credit card or something like that. So you can have different taglines in order for you to change the meaning of how your mind is perceiving a particular picture in front of you. That was another one. So if you change it to complete, it might be something different. Yes, so mental state determines your perception. So let's look at what areas of the brain um, are used in forming these associations. So images and words are going to combine to form new images and mental imagery in your head. So you might initially have a picture of, say, just the table, but once you start associating that picture of the table with, say, comfort, that image in your head might change completely. It might move from just having a dinner table to maybe having a laughing party or being in a having dinner with a loved one. Or if I change the word from comfort to lonely, the picture in your head of the dining table might change from to a point where you are alone at the table, or you've kind of been abandoned by somebody, or you've been stood up at a date or something like that. So your entire mental imagery of that particular table is now being changed. And this is what is happening in any kind of a reading. Is essentially we are coming up with pulling out these cards and looking at them, but we also have our little like notebooks sometimes, which like with little meanings in them. And then we are then tagging those meanings onto those cards to kind of make it the next layer of the cake. We're kind of baking in the next layer of the cake by adding meaning and metaphors to the particular image. So this is how our brain gets there. So we spoke about how our brain has moved from your visual processing to your temporal and parietal lobes in order to kind of get a sense of what the object is. So the next layer in this is where we are adding metaphors and associations to this particular thing. And so here we're using our memory centers. So like, what does a comforting dinner table mean to you? So you might look back in your past and pull those things like, what is comfort food, and what does it mean to be cozy? So kind of pulling back from your memories of what that means. Maybe a piece of music comes into your head. So all that is coming from your memory centers in your hippocampus. And then what does it make you feel? So that's all coming from your emotional centers in your amygdala. So, so when you, along with your memories, you're also tagging in information about emotions, and that is also going to now be packaged in with that particular association. And the main part of the brain that's kind of putting it all together and integrating all these information together is this blue area right here. That's called the cingulate cortex. And that's kind of almost like it moves all the way from the front of your brain all the way to the back. And that part of the brain is your master integrator to generate metaphors and to generate association. So it's kind of your master integrator of all this information. It's pulling in, what is this object? How do I feel about the object? What are my past associations with this situation and this word? And then also your current mental state. So maybe if I'm sitting at when I'm looking at this picture, but I'm already like agitated or unhappy, that is going to lead me down a particular set of associations. Whereas if I am in a much more calm state, that's going to lead me down a different set of meanings. And that's all coming from right here in your prefrontal cortex. Is your current emotional state is also going to be really important. Current state of your being is going to kind of feed into this integrator as well. So all of this is going to be put together in that blue area called the cingulate cortex. And that's going to be really important for forming those metaphors and associations between them. So now we have kind of baked our cake where we have now have our tarot image or some kind of image. And then on top of that, we've kind of laid our meanings and formed the story behind it. And in a tarot reading, then we leap beyond that into kind of making like an intuitive guess as to what does this mean? How does this lead to a particular behavioral choice? So there's a story in front of me. I can see the mental image in front of me. And now I'm now going to use that information in order to say, okay, this is what this whole thing means. This is what you're supposed to do, or this is what your current state is like. So that is this intuitive leap that we're making next. So uh, an intuitive leap where we're using our intuition is almost like using your brain blindfolded, where you're saying, if I ask you right now, should I go left or should I go right? You might not have all the information, but you have to make a choice. So you're saying, okay, go left. And so it's your brain telling you to do certain things without you having all the information at hand in your on a conscious level. So in this picture, for example, you might be asking this person, where is the treasure? And even though they don't know why they're answering a certain way, they're pointing to that leftmost thing saying the treasure is behind that. So later on is when they'll say, you know what, I saw all these clues and this pattern, and that's why I chose option A. But that is not the state at this point. They just have to make a choice, and you're saying, okay, I'm intuitively guessing that the option is behind this. And this is where your brain, your unconscious brain, has a lot of information, and it's being forced to make a choice, and it's that leap of faith that's going on. And we're going to try and figure out what kind of information is being used in order to kind of make that leap of faith. So maybe some of you can come up with this. It doesn't have to be a list, but maybe is there like an intuitive decision that you made without knowing why? It doesn't have to be a big decision. It could be a small decision. Any of you have experience with something like this where you've made an intuitive decision without really knowing why you made that decision? For my end, I was with my husband, about to buy a house in Seattle, and it was a beautiful 3-bedroom condo, and we had signed the contract, we got in, but then I was like, there's something off about this place. I don't know why this is going on. So we really pulled out of the deal last minute because I was like, no, some bad juju is going on here. I have no idea what it is, and we pulled out. I still don't know why, what went on, but there was this weird gut reaction in me that was just saying, no, this is not my house. And that was a big intuitive decision that I made. Every day, Rochelle says they make intuitive decisions every day. John is talking about a motive to pay off mortgage quickly. So a lot of times these might not be logical. You might not be able to justify why you're making these decisions, but they're still happening. And a lot of times the reasons behind them might be something that your brain is taking in very unconsciously, and then it's then you might later on realize that this is why you made that particular choice or move forward in a certain pattern. So one thing that's there in behind these kinds of intuitive decision making is usually it's very, very quick. Um, Kendall is talking about people's energies. Yeah, that's something that's really interesting, is how we pick up on certain people's energy to avoid certain people or move forward with certain people. And the one thing I do want to tell you is that what's been found is that intuitive decision making is not instinctual. It's not instinctual, as in it's not hardwired. Like, your intuition is not hardwired. It's not instinctual. But intuitive decision is something you learn over time. In fact, you they say that kids who are about 6 or 7 is when they start honing in on their intuitive decision-making capacity, as opposed to instinctual, reactionary decision-making capacity. So you learn it over time. Somebody is telling you this is good and this is wrong, or this smells good and this smells wrong, or this is something that you might want to move forward with, and so you're kind of like processing it over time to hone in your intuition over and over time. And you can become better and better at your intuition the more you practice it, and the more you look back on why you made those decisions. So if a lot of times, say, if you are given a test of your intuitive abilities and you're asked to answer the questions, the intuitive answer uh, gives you a sense of, oh, I resolved that question, or I resolved the conflict, but it might not be the right answer when you're taking an exam or something like that. But over time, if you practice your intuition over and over again, you get better and better at it, and then your intuitive choices become more and more like correct over time. So intuition refers to your gut feeling, and that you just know that something is right. You cannot really give a logical explanation for it. It's kind of, your brain is pulling out information about patterns and adding meanings and structure with no actual conscious processing behind it. Um, and there's usually a judgment involved. Is it like a right or a wrong response? And we have this ability to be intuitive because humans have evolved to make very quick split-second decisions about should I stay or should I go? Will I be eaten by this lion, or, is this poisonous or not? So you really need to make those very quick on-the-spot decisions, and you need to rely on your intuitive abilities to make those decisions. Otherwise, you'll be paralyzed and just be like completely like stuck in one place without having the ability to move forward. So intuition is something that we've actually evolved for. So we have the brain circuits for intuition, and it's really important for us to move forward in life. Um, this is an exercise. I'm just going to put it out there, but I don't know if we'll all of you have decks and stuff in front of you, so let's not like move forward with it maybe. But this is an exercise you can practice. So where you take a bunch of cards, or even like you put out three objects in front of you, and then close your eyes and think about which of those three piles of cards or which of those three objects you will actually pick. And don't think about it logically. Think about like the first thing that comes in your head about which of these objects that you are going to pick. And as you're moving towards a particular object, try and push your hand away and try and pick a different set of object or a different pile of cards, and see if you feel it or notice it within your body, if you're able to gravitate towards something and then you forcibly move your hand away from something like that. This is an exercise. It's a really good exercise for you to practice to kind of figure out where some of your gut feeling is coming from. Okay, Linda has raised her hand. Linda, yeah, go for it.
Well, I have a question. I'm wondering how our aura, particularly like our etheric body and emotional bodies, fit into this, because I saw you at the UK at the Portland Tarot Conference, and was just really intrigued with your talk, like I am today. But when I am reading a card, I'm going over the cards with my hands, trying to figure out which one to pick. I feel like there's a part of me that knows what's behind each card, because my aura knows. My etheric body or emotional body knows what's behind each of those cards, even though I don't consciously know it. And so that my hand just automatically goes to the card that I'm meant to pick. Does any of that make sense?
It makes sense. So there are two parts to my answer. One part is there is actually very limited scientific information about psychic abilities and auras, and so sadly there's like a really like a big dearth of information about that kind of information. What information we do have is how aware are you of your inner body senses? So we're going to talk about inner body senses in a second, but you have the ability inside of you to kind of know how fast your heart is beating, or how much your lung is expanded, or how much your stomach is contracted, and so on. And if we are aware of it consciously, that will make us completely like crazy. If you know every single movement of your stomach all the time, then it'll be very difficult to process. But unconsciously, your brain is actually tabulating all this information. So part of what you're talking about, or your body knows what's going on in front of you, is that you might be much more aware of your inner workings, and you've used it so often that you are becoming more and more attuned to it, and it's easier for you to process it. And that's what is coming up when you're doing your readings. I do think there is, beyond just our inner stuff, I also think there is external energies, but the problem is we just don't have um, maybe the tools um, or the studies to show that at this point. I think part of that arises from the way we perceive the world is mainly through the five external senses, of sight, touch, sound and taste and so on. But if you're thinking about electromagnetic pulses or other kinds of invisible information that's coming in, um, we we just don't have the ability to say, hey, I sense this electromagnetic pulse, or we just don't have the ability to vocalize it or verbalize it at this point. And I think when we get the tools to measure those things much more effectively is when we'll be able to give voice to the other aspect of the external energies that you're talking about, the psychic energies that you're talking about.
Because there's also like there are a lot of artists, like well, even Leadbeater, who I'm just thinking about thought forms and the fact that, we can be walking down the street and evidently be hit by other people's thoughts and emotions and thought forms. And I think this kind of plays into things that we sense also. So we're kind of always hit with these things that we don't see on a continuous basis.
Yeah, there's a really interesting institute called the Institute of Noetic Sciences. They are based in near San Francisco, and they are actually beginning to do some actual really good empirical research around these kinds of questions. They are putting sensors on people's guts and kind of measuring gut feeling and stuff like that. And it's really fascinating to watch to see where that's going to go. Um,
So, yeah, I have a question.
mhm,
So there's like there have been many times when I've been asked to distinguish between instinct and intuition,
mhm,
and then there is this part about getting it logical,
mhm,
and then there's this part about, listening to, like, imagine having an imaginary friend in your head, and then listening to, like, conversing, and then going on what that voice says. And then this part about, having an external feeling, like when you're walking, you're just pushed to one side, and then when you just look around, then the push was right. So you're being pushed to be on the safer side. And then, like, when you're working with something, all of a sudden, something happens by accident, but it's actually the right thing. Like when you go on a Facebook, and then I'm looking for someone to sell my one of my products, and then automatically my hand, like, presses on something, and then I see that when I go and investigate, I see that, that's the person who needed the product, and she had the requirements, something like that. So it's like this, there's so many things. I'm really confused about, what is really intuition.
Yeah, so real intuition is going to be where you are processing unconscious, your brain is taking in a lot of unconscious information, and then it's on behind the scenes, it's kind of pattern matching and trying to then say, all this information is irrelevant, all this information is relevant, and I'm going to use this information in order to make this particular judgment call or choice. And some of this information coming in might be internal, some of that might be external, and then it's kind of putting it all together in a very quick fashion to make that intuitive decision making. A lot of intuitive decision making research has been done on surgeons and athletes, where if you go to a doctor, a newly minted doctor might be literally like thinking about, oh, I read this in my anatomy textbook. When I cut this thing, I'm going to see this, and then I'm going to move to the next step, and so on. They might be going through a logical step-by-step fashion, whereas a much more expert doctor might have encountered all kinds of weird stuff in their practices that when they open up and they see a bleed, they'll be like, okay, I need to do this to stop the bleeding, and it's going to be there. And so even though they are blindly going in, they have this intuitive gut feeling as to where that's going on. And so, and what they've said is the intuitive decision making there is about 8 to 15 seconds faster than the logical step by step, which could be in life or death, basically. So that's kind of where the intuitive, and we'll talk in a minute about what parts of the brain are involved in that. And before that, Chris has raised his hand. I just want to go to him.
Yeah, it's that I put in the chat. I don't know if you saw it, but it's that it was all under my awareness. I don't know if you saw the story, but I was coming up the backside of Roanoke here near Volunteer Park. I think it's Christmas Eve, and it was snowy. Things were closed. Nobody was out, not even people with dogs. And I was only out because I have a four-wheel drive that I love to take out in the snow, so I can go wherever I want, whenever I want. And no one was out there. And after the cops called back and said the cops wanted to thank you for calling, that he had been wandering around for like an hour in the snow, I was like, why did I call? Because it wasn't really enough, an I mean, but it wasn't right. I just knew somewhere deep down inside that that something wasn't right. And then as I went through all the factors, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That is what's going on in the street. Didn't think about it. No one was out with dogs. Oh yeah, that's right.
Mm-mm.
He was shuffling around. That's right. The stores were closed. And that hill, if you know that hill, it's very icy and he was
Mhm.
headed towards it. So I figured better safe than sorry, but I didn't have access to why I did it. I just knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and that what you're talking about is a classic example of a difference between your reflexive part of your brain and the reflective part of the brain, where you're almost like reflexively making a decision call, and then when you later on reflect back on, hey, what was going on that I made that comes, and that part is what gives you the insight, which adds to your intuitive decision making, which kind of makes your intuitive decision making much better. Um, yeah, we'll get to those brain part, but essentially the one thing that I'm really excited that all of you are like getting into this, like it's so like nerdy and geeky for me, but it's like exciting. But this inner senses that we're using is called interoception. So we've all heard about the exteroceptive, like your external senses. You also have proprioception, which is kind of giving you an idea of where your body is in space. So that those are like sensors in your muscles and your tendons to say my hand is sticking out this way or my leg is sticking out that way. So that's your proprioception. But you also have interoception, which is these tiny sensors on your gut, your tiny sensors on your lungs, in your nose. So in a lot of meditative practices, they might say, feel the breath like going in and like all the way down to your lungs. And that's actually happening. Like you're actually sensing it. And so this is one way to become more interoceptively aware by kind of doing those kinds of practices because you can then start noticing if your heart is beating faster or slower. So a lot of people might say, "Oh, when I saw that, I felt disgust," and that could be because your stomach was clenched very tight, and that is again you're telling your brain, "Oh, my stomach got clenched tight," and that meant that I was kind of disgusted about it. So you're actually like processing those kinds of internal body senses in order to come up with certain emotional or situational information, which your then brain then puts together towards your intuitive processing. So, and the more time you spend thinking about your internal like how fast is my if right now if I asked each of you how fast is your heart beating, you might not be able to tell me. But for the next say 15 days, if you say count or if you pause and say, okay, how fast is my heart beating now, and you start like intentionally thinking about it, then after 15 days you'll be able to tell me how fast is my heart beating in a particular situation. And it I remember that going back, I used to make a lot of quick intuitive decisions. It's always like I'll think about a particular decision and say, do I feel the sinking feeling in my chest? And if I felt that, then I wouldn't make that decision. So, and I was literally like paying attention to my lungs and my breathing at that point because you have these little sensors, and the more intentionality you put behind those particular senses, the better you'll get at using them for calibrating your day-to-day decision making. I'm not saying be constantly aware of it because that might be difficult and very difficult for you to move forward with things. But I think spending a little bit of time to become a little bit more aware of it will give you an idea, especially if you're using some of these for making those important decisions. Like some people talk about how they feel an ease in their shoulders when they make the right decision. So if you have certain body touch points that you use for certain things, that's going to be important for you to notice when you're making those decision making. Rochelle, you had a question?
I do because I'm wondering, you say part of the brain is set up for intuition, or I'm not saying it exactly the way you said it, but that it's not something that is instinctual. It doesn't come with you. But I also know that, like, when I was a little girl, my mother, if I was trying to decide between two things, she would say to me, imagine choosing one of them, feel what your body feels like, then imagine choosing the other one, feel what your body feels like, and that will help you make your decision. And I think that that's just like from a very early age training the intuition,
Yeah,
right? Would you say
yeah,
so?
yeah, yeah. Your mom was like really great in kind of making you more bodily aware, because this is one of the main feeders into your intuitive circuits, your insula. So this is this purple structure over here. That's your insula, and that is the main information for your internal senses. So when you're feeling your body when you're imagining a particular situation and you're feeling your body, that part of the brain is getting activated. And then right below it is this red structure over here. That's your caudate nucleus. That's your main intuitive integrator. So it's putting together all the information from your current emotional states, your past states, and your interoceptive information together to make those intuitive leaps. And so your mum was really training you to become more intuitive, basically. And a lot of us don't get that training from a young age. Um, Oh, Kendall asked an interesting question. Can your interception be offline in certain individuals? Yes. So in fact, if there is a disconnect between your, say, let's say that I'm going into a difficult situation and my body is saying, oh, my stomach is being clenched, or my heart is beating really fast, and but then my brain is not interpreting it as I'm feeling anxious. Instead, my brain is like labeling it as something else. If there's a disconnect between what your body is feeling and what your brain is labeling as, then that becomes a huge problem. So that's something that people have to get retrained on, and a lot of mental disorders might happen because of that brain body disconnect in that labeling problem, and that is something that people need to work on to kind of find that connection between the brain and the body. And more they are discovering that emotional processing is not the brain telling the body how to react, but rather the brain processing how the body is reacting and then labeling it as I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling, a certain way. So it's almost the brain is the labeler as opposed to the enactor of that particular emotion. Your physiological response to a situation or cards or patterns is going to be as important as the brain putting it all together.
Yeah, I have a question here.
Yeah.
I don't know how to press the hand icon. I'm still searching for it. But does this have anything to do with the religion or the any kind of religious beliefs? Because with autistic kids, I think there was a time when they came up with the pop-up poppets and the sound that it makes. So sometimes, when I sit when I sit and try to figure it out, it's like when I try to ask a question, the top of my brain just does that click sound that comes from the puppet. But I don't sense I haven't sensed this before. Like, oh, it's only after I've come here, when I've tried to start listening to sounds and trying to hear about voices, I've done. But does it have to do with religion, or is it like some?
I don't think it has anything to do with religion, because part of the brain emotional intuitive study was done on a cross-cultural study where they did it across from people from Thailand, from China, from the Western countries. So, and they did a whole cross-cultural study as to, if I asked you right now, if I asked you to picture yourself in your head as to say, I'm feeling sad, where do you feel it in your body? or if I ask you to imagine yourself feeling happy, where do you feel it in the body? Across cultures, people responded that they felt this, almost when you said happiness, it almost emerged from your heart. Or when you felt sadness, you felt like a coldness in your legs. So, I don't know about religion, but irrespective of culture, there seemed to be a certain bodily response associated with particular kinds of emotional states, which probably points to a certain kind of wiring of how those particular sensors in those parts of the body are being attuned, and used by the brain to determine how do I feel at this particular point. Um, yeah, I don't know how religion is coming into it, except maybe some kind of maybe organizational or ritualistic aspects of things. But I need to think about that a little bit. So what do you use for your intuition? You use situational cues, so what's going on around you. We just talked about all the interoception, and then it's also your current state of affairs, like where are you in space right now. And studies have also shown that better positive feelings lead to better intuitive decision making. And so, and people feel better after making an intuitive decision as opposed to a logical decision. So, if I decide to, say, take an action on that house, if I had gone through the logical steps, I would have bought the house, but I would not have felt as good as I took the intuitive decision to quit on the house because my gut was saying don't do it, and I actually felt okay about it. And that is called as cognitive ease and feeling this relief almost of making that decision, and that's coming from making those intuitive, almost emotional decisions, which is kind of giving you a feeling of feeling better. It might have not been the correct decision, but it was the right decision at that particular point of time. Is kind of what I would say about that. And these are the main parts of the brain involved in this. So the green area over here is your caudate nucleus, which I just talked about. That's the master intuition integrator. It's kind of in the center of the brain, and this part of the brain is actually also affected a little bit in things like Parkinson's disease, which is why some people who are going through treatment for Parkinson's might become gamblers or kind of change the way their intuitive decision making processing happens, because you're kind of altering the brain chemistry of that particular region. But you're using your memory and your emotions and your current emotional states and integrating all of that together in order to spit out your current intuitive decision making. So how to become better at intuition? The answer is become an expert. So the more you train yourself, if you're making intuitive decisions all the time, like look back on it and say, hey, why did I make that decision? Was it right? What was my decision right? If you look back on it and then you say, okay, these are the patterns I noticed in order for me to make that decision, the next time you encounter that, you'll become better at it. So if you are an active tarot reader, my answer to you would be, um, document your readings and then go back and check if you made the right call. And then if you didn't, or if you did, find out like, okay, what elements in these cards let me decide that this is the right way to go, or think about those kinds of things, because that's going to be useful the next time around in order for you to make the better intuitive decision like going forward. Um, and again, all of this information is coming from research behind doctors and athletes. So we've seen many, many times, say, if there's an old tennis player and there's a young one, the anticipation of where the ball is going to go, how am I going to hit it? Like, where is the other person going to go? So the older athlete is able to anticipate and intuitively guess like where things are going to go, because they've just spent a lot of time like processing it and thinking about how things are going to happen, as opposed to somebody who's thinking, okay, if I hit the ball there, it's going to come back here, and it's going to be a much slower, maybe not as intuitive way of thinking about it. And they found that if you are a novice or a young person who's coming into the field, um, you're mainly using two parts of the brain in order to make those decisions. So you're using your memory centers and your current emotional states, and those are the main things you're using. Whereas in a proper intuitive decision making, you're using multiple parts of the brains together in order to kind of bring it together and engaging that caudate nucleus in the center to really spit out an intuitive leap of faith. And so the hope is the more knowledge you gain, the better you'll become at that intuitive decision making that you're having. So the other aspect which we again touched upon before was insight. So this is something that you're kind of looking back upon later and thinking about things. And this is going to be really important for becoming better at intuition. You kind of need to pause and think about, okay, why did this happen? Sometimes this insight might happen because you're actually working through those steps logically in your brain. Okay, I saw all this and this is why this happened. Sometimes it might just hit you in the shower when you're just standing there and you're thinking, okay, what is going on? And these kinds of, and sometimes the Buddhists have a really interesting word for it. It's called abhisamaya, which is this lightning bolt out of like nowhere, which suddenly like, that's why I chose that. It is almost like there's no um, uh, you didn't actually thoughtfully work through the why it happened, but it kind of hits you out of the blue. And that happens because it kind of was percolating below the surface, and at some point it just comes out and comes out. And it's almost like this, where if all of this under the water is your unconscious intuition, and so you're getting inputs, and then that's then leads to different solutions that can be there, and then you're putting together different things, and finally you're getting that, okay, if I make this answer or choice, that's going to resolve the situation. And that initially that's giving you that cognitive ease. Okay, I'm done. I see a lion, I'm going to run away or I'm going to fight it. Made my decision. I'm going to move forward. I'm not paralyzed anymore. That's giving you the cognitive ease over here. Um, but then the rest of it is where you're getting the insight, where you reflect back on that action and say, okay, why did I do this? Maybe I did this because of this. And you're kind of reflecting back on it. And then slowly it percolates in your brain to finally land up with insight. So it takes like much more. And you can think of all the depth below as your unconscious brain leading to your intuition. And your conscious brain is what is reflecting back on things to get you into your insight. And these are very different brain areas. So the blue areas are your reflective areas, which are kind of going to go later on. And the pink areas are your reflexive, like the very quick thinking aspects of you. So the reflexive areas are going to be much more about the intuitive processing, and the reflective areas are more about the insight aspect of things. So, and again, we don't have to do this exercise right now, but this is a very interesting exercise that you can do. Either look at an image or pick an object and then either doodle quickly the first thing that comes to your mind, or write down the first 5 words that come to your mind. So that would be your intuitive bit. Then look at the words or look at the doodle and say, okay, why did I draw this? What prompted me to come up with these words? And that is when you're going to be engaging the reflective bits of your brain. So this is something that you can use in your common practice in order for you to become more and more intuitive. So and aside from just the words, also think about, when I think of this particular word, do I feel it in a particular part of my body? When I look at this doodle, do I feel it in particular parts of my body? So kind of think about it in much more of a whole body fashion rather about just a cerebral fashion. And that can really help you hone your intuition and become better and better at it over time. So. So just to recap what we've kind of talked till now, tarot images lead to mental imagery and seeing within your mind's eye, and we form complex associations. And then when we kind of tag images with words and images with metaphors and so on. And then when we look at those together, we make those intuitive leaps, which are using those reflexive part of your brains. And you get better and better at your intuition if you start diving back into thinking about, okay, what parts of this card allowed me to go down this rabbit hole? So if you kind of look back on that, that's going to really help you make those insightful decisions. And then what we didn't talk about is how does your emotional processing come in? And that's a huge part of it. And I talk about that in length in the book. What parts of your body are involved and how can you notice them and so on. And this, because when you start noticing that a little bit better, it makes your intuitive processes much more sharper. Jocelyn asked about whether recording will be available, and Josh said yes, there will be a YouTube recording, which will be available to everybody. So, yeah. So I'm going to move to a different aspect, but if you have other questions about that initial bit, we can pause and talk about that right now. Cool, I'll continue. But feel free to, oh, Chris, you had a question.
So where is it? Like, what? That's what I'm trying to understand about myself is like, where is, when all of this is unburied from my awareness, why is it unburied? Like, and you touched a little bit on how to get it into the consciousness. Um, and I'd like to hear more about that because I'm always perplexed. Like this time with this older guy who likely had dementia out there in the snow, this time I was right. But sometimes I jump to a conclusion, or I call it jumping to a conclusion, and I'm not right. I'm wrong. And then how do I tell the difference?
You don't. I mean, the intuitive decision making that might not always be the correct decision, but is the best decision in that moment of time to move forward with things. And only upon reflection, right now, you're probably good at a lot of intuitive decision making because you've been, since you were like 6 years old, you've been like trained to kind of adjust to, if I do these things, it's going to work out, or I shouldn't eat these food groups, or, certain things you've kind of become part of your repertoire of intuitive decision making. And part of this process is to listen to your body and listen to certain, like, figure out what cues are you looking at in order to make those intuitive decisions. And that can only happen if you pay attention and kind of reflect back on your decisions and say, okay, was I right? Was I wrong? And so on. You have to reflect back on it. And so where is it happening is kind of, going back to um, this, the caudate nucleus is the main part of the brain where your intuitive decision making is happening, but so I would probably say like these pink areas of your brain are the ones that's really responsible for those reflexive actions. And then they are getting fed in information from the blue areas later on in order to make them better the next time around. So, um, so yeah, we just get better at it over time, I guess. So. So one interesting field that's emerging right now is the field of neuroforecasting, which is really fascinating because if I polled a bunch of people and asked them what song is going to be the most downloaded 6 months down the line, they consciously might say it's going to be song A. But if I record it from their brain, subconsciously, it might all be pointing towards something else. So, and what they found is the subconscious collective brain prediction is actually turning out to be true. So you have parts of your brain that get respond to positive things like, okay, this is going to be the best thing out there a year from now or 6 months from now, or these things are going to be like completely like not usable like a year from now. And subconsciously, there are different parts of the brain that are actually responding to this. And there's a field now of study of neuroforecasting that's looking at these specific areas to see if and they are saying that yes, your brains can actually predict what can happen 6 months to a year from now, with all the with 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 those the unconscious information that's there, that's available to it. And that's a really exciting field that's emerging right now. And the two main areas of the brain involved in this are the nucleus accumbens for the positive or the things, positive outcomes that are going to be out there, and the insula, which we talked about before, is going to be about the negative outcomes that are going to be out there. And both of those areas are what they're looking at in order to assess which things are going to be popular or unpopular down the line. What we don't know is we're using this in tarot readings, especially when you're talking about foretelling and stuff like that. A lot of the tarot conferences been to recently, they've kind of moved away from the forecasting and the foretelling aspect of things, and thinking more about tarot as a way to self-inquire and using it more as a basis of trying to understand yourself or the other person. So they kind of moved away a little bit from the active forecasting or foretelling aspects. But it'll be interesting to see if some of these concepts come up in a tarot reading as well. The other aspect which is really important in one of these readings is the social aspect of things. So when I'm talking to you right now and I'm saying these words, but how you're receiving the words is going to be up to you, right? So and then I might say things and you'd be like, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's all like complete BS. And you might just completely like, it won't fit within your plot narrative of what you are and who you are at this point of time. So, so that social transaction is something we experience a lot in when we are doing this thing like a tarot, where we are telling somebody, or if you're a financial analyst and you're talking to somebody, and they might just not listen, or they might not respond to the narrative that you're laying out in front of them. So that is a really important aspect of something like this. So how is the plot narrative or the story that you're laying out, how is it received by the other person, and how are they interpreting it, is a big part. So social cognition is going to be a big part of anything that's got to do with tarot readings. And a lot of it has got to do with I was fascinated when I came across this, that when we are reading for another person or trying to talk to another person about it, we are first we need to perceive what they are feeling. So how are they sitting? How are they posing their question? What is the tone of their voice? We're using all that to kind of perceive it. And then we mirror it almost. So we have this ability to say, okay, they feel this way, and then so you have an ability to mirror it in yourself. So maybe you'll assume the same defensive posture that they are sitting in, or you might also have the same tenseness in your shoulders as they have. So you kind of mirror their emotions. And then finally, you have this thing called mentalizing, where we are kind of creating a mini version of the other person in your head and attributing desires and intentionality and motivations to that mini golem in your head, and then saying, okay, what will this person do in this situation? And then that's what you're using to tell, okay, this is what's going to happen next. And this aspect of mentalizing was just like fascinating to me, like this, creating this, and we are doing this all the time. Every single time we meet somebody, we are creating this mental picture of them and asking, what is this person's motivation? What are they going to do? How are they going to act like when I'm walking in front of them? So we are constantly creating this. And this is a very, very important part of any kind of tarot reading. And we're using our social cognitive abilities of our brains to indulge in this.